The car swerved violently across 3 lanes of traffic, narrowly missing a family sedan. Victoria's hands gripped the steering wheel so hard her knuckles turned white, and in that split second between life and death, she realized that all the board meetings, all the corner office prestige, and all the 6-figure salary in the world meant absolutely nothing when you were about to crash into oncoming traffic at 60 miles per hour. The highway stretched before her like a dark ribbon of fate, and the only thing standing between her and oblivion was a stranger's quick thinking and a heart she had brutally mocked just hours before. But we need to rewind to where this story truly begins, not in panic and adrenaline, but in the quiet devastation of a man trying to build a life for his daughter while the world looked down on him. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of humanity to transform us, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel. This story is about to prove why compassion matters. Marcus had been a dental hygienist for 12 years. He worked 6 days a week, sometimes picking up evening shifts at a community clinic to ensure his 8-year-old daughter, Emma, had everything she needed. His apartment was small but immaculate. The walls were covered with Emma's school drawings and photographs of her laughing, missing her 2 front teeth, radiant in a way that only children can be. He made $42,000 a year, and he managed it with the precision of someone who understood that every dollar had a purpose. There were no vacations, no fancy dinners, no new cars. There were only the necessities and the love that made every sacrifice worth it. When his well-meaning sister signed him up for a blind date without asking his permission, Marcus almost laughed. He hadn't been on a date since his ex-wife left 3 years ago. He was out of practice, out of touch with the dating world, and honestly, he wasn't sure he had the emotional energy for it anymore. But his sister was persistent, and Emma had asked him why Daddy never smiled at grown-ups anymore. That question broke something in him, not in a bad way, but in the way that makes you realize you need to try, even if trying terrifies you. Victoria Anderson didn't know who Marcus was when she arrived at the upscale restaurant her co-worker had recommended. She was the chief executive officer of Millbrook Technologies, a woman who had clawed her way to the top through sheer determination and a willingness to step on anyone who got in her way. She wore designer clothes that cost more than Marcus made in a month. Her phone buzzed constantly with emails from people whose jobs depended on her approval. She had achieved everything society told her to want, and yet there was a hollowness inside her that no amount of success had filled. When Marcus walked in, wearing the only nice shirt he owned and shoes he'd had polished specifically for this evening, Victoria felt that familiar surge of judgment rise in her chest. She had always been drawn to men of power and status, men who could match her ambition and her lifestyle. This man looked nervous, humble, unpretentious. Within the first 5 minutes of sitting down, she learned he was a dental hygienist, and she couldn't quite keep the smile of superiority from playing at her lips. The conversation started politely enough, but Victoria's contempt grew with each answer Marcus gave. When he mentioned that his daughter was his greatest achievement, she laughed, an actual laugh, and asked what exactly he had achieved by working a dead-end job that any high school graduate could get. Marcus felt the sting of her words like a physical blow, but he didn't respond with anger. Instead, he set down his fork and looked at her with such profound sadness that, for a moment, Victoria felt a flicker of something uncomfortable in her chest. He told her that he had achieved the love of a child who didn't care how much money he made, only that he was there to pick her up from school, to help her with her homework, to tuck her in at night. He said that some people spent their entire lives chasing titles and money, only to realize too late that they'd missed out on the only thing that actually mattered. Victoria didn't know how to respond to that. She wasn't cruel by nature, but she had been shaped by a world that measured worth in dollar signs and corporate achievements. She changed the subject, made light of his words, and essentially told him that she had no time for such simple sentiments. The dinner ended awkwardly, with Victoria thanking him but making it clear there would be no second date. Marcus left the restaurant with a mixture of heartbreak and resignation. He'd tried, and it hadn't worked out. At least he could tell his sister he'd made the effort. Victoria lingered at the restaurant longer than she needed to, finishing her wine and scrolling through her phone. She noticed a news alert about a major client crisis and texted her assistant to prepare an emergency meeting for the following morning. She felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, that addiction to crisis management that kept her going. This was what she was good at. This was what she understood. Not romance, not connection, not the vulnerability that Marcus had inadvertently offered her. She left the restaurant around 11 o'clock and headed toward the highway that would take her home. It was a dark night, the kind of night where the world feels smaller and quieter than usual. Victoria was thinking about the board meeting scheduled for 8 in the morning, mentally rehearsing her talking points when a blowout happened without warning. The front right tire exploded with a sound like a gunshot, and suddenly the car was no longer hers to control. It lurched toward the center median, and in her panic, Victoria overcorrected, sending the vehicle spinning across 3 lanes of traffic. This was when the universe decided to perform one of its mysterious interventions. Marcus was driving home from the restaurant, taking the same highway back toward his quiet neighborhood and the daughter who was sleeping safely under the care of his trusted babysitter. He was processing the evening, wondering if he should have stood up to Victoria's mockery when he saw headlights careening across the road ahead. He didn't think. There was no time to think. His instincts, honed by years of emergency response training he'd received as part of his healthcare certification, kicked in automatically. He swerved his car into the path of Victoria's vehicle, using his own body and car as a buffer between her and the truck that was bearing down in the other direction. The collision happened in slow motion and in an instant, all at once. Metal crunched. Glass shattered. Victoria's car was pushed safely into the median while Marcus's vehicle took the full brunt of the impact from the truck. Airbags deployed. Everything went silent except for the sound of the wind rushing through broken windows and the distant sound of car horns blaring. When Marcus opened his eyes, he was alive, though his ribs screamed with pain and blood ran down the side of his face from a gash near his temple. Victoria's car was damaged but intact. She was alive. He had saved her, the woman who had looked at him with such contempt just an hour earlier, as if his life and his choices were somehow beneath her consideration. He had saved her because that was who he was, not because of what he did for a living, but because of what lived inside his heart. Emergency responders arrived within minutes. Marcus was rushed to the hospital with several broken ribs and a concussion. Victoria was almost unharmed, which meant she was completely aware of what had happened. Completely conscious of the fact that this man, this kind, humble dental hygienist with the beautiful daughter at home, had put his own life in danger to protect hers. She rode in the ambulance behind his, her hands shaking, her carefully constructed worldview crumbling around her. At the hospital, while Marcus was in recovery, Victoria sat in the waiting room and cried. Not the refined, controlled tears of someone who had everything under control, but deep, racking sobs that came from a place inside her that hadn't been touched in years. She cried for the years she'd wasted chasing hollow victories. She cried for the kindness she'd been too proud to recognize. And she cried for a man who, despite her cruelty, had valued her life more than his own safety. When Marcus woke up, Victoria was there. She didn't say much at first. She just sat beside his hospital bed and held his hand, and in that simple gesture was all the apology and gratitude and life-altering recognition that words could never adequately express. Over the following weeks, as Marcus recovered, Victoria stayed. She brought Emma books and toys. She learned what it meant to know someone for their heart rather than their resume. She resigned from her position at Millbrook Technologies and took a new job that paid less but allowed her the time to be present, to be human, to be the kind of person who could sit beside a hospital bed and understand what truly mattered. Marcus and Victoria's story didn't end with a simple fairy tale ending, because real life is more complex than that. But it began with a single moment of grace, where one person's humility and kindness changed another person's life forever. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you why compassion matters and why we should never judge someone's worth by their job title, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below and tell us, When was a time someone's kindness completely changed your perspective? We'd love to hear your stories.